This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Deborah Burris-Kitchen for the first time. And thank you for being on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to let everybody know we are a featured podcast on Newsly. You can listen on Newsly. You can see the icon up there. Use coupon code GHOST. You can get 1 month free premium subscription so you can stop scrolling and start listening. This podcast will be on Newsly later today. So, again, thank you for being on the program. I think we're going to have a great conversation. I don't always get to have people who have your point of view on the show, and I think it's going to be really interesting to go into a lot of things that you're into. So, one of the first questions that you're ready to answer is like, what do you do? So maybe you can kind of give me a high level of what you do.
Okay. I am a criminologist, sociologist. I got my PhD in 1995 from Western Michigan. And so now I am the chair of the Criminal Justice Department at Tennessee State University, where I teach and do research and write and also do administrative work, of course.
That's interesting. I was a double major at Bowdoin. I'm a sociology and political science major.
Nice.
So it's interesting to actually talk to somebody in that area. And so, yeah, the theme we wanted to talk about is the myth of meritocracy. Um, and it being in the sociology and criminology, and I think you basically a lot of the things you talk about are a lot of the ills in society today, like sexism, racism, crime and poverty, and social change and challenges to social change. Um, so maybe like what's your latest book, and maybe the books that you want to talk about in terms of address some of these issues? Like what would be the first book you want to talk about?
Um, I have my most recent publication is titled Exposed, and it is a book of short stories and poetry that basically address many of the issues that I am passionate about dealing with or talking about or discussing in order to try to bring about social change, and that is sexism, racism, the myth of the meritocracy, of course. And I actually have a poem called Exposure of a Caste, which kind of outlines our caste system, the myth that we are a capitalistic economic system, but it's more or less a caste system. And then, of course, toxic masculinity. All those issues are addressed in that book. I've written several books, but most of them are academic pieces.
Hmm.
The other book that I wrote that was more of a memoir has been years and years ago. I think it was 2002, and that was called Short Rage, and that was kind of the same book, but I based it on being vertically challenged and then talking about some of the issues of being vertically challenged and how that made me empathetic towards issues that other people might be facing as far as being discriminated against based on skin color, social class, things like that.
It's interesting today because we're dealing with like a very kind of volatile age. I'm, being an African American and I'm part Native American, Cherokee and Blackfoot. In my day job, I'm an IT professional, and I don't really see a lot of people who look like me in my profession. I tend to be the only person in the room, and I've hit glass ceilings. I've been
Mm.
working 30 years and I've hit ceilings, and I've kind of gone into independent consulting because I got tired of being in the corporate structure because I found that like the meritocracy thing didn't work for me in that structure. I had to go outside and just be paid based on what I can do. And so I got into this idea of being a consultant. I found I was more free and actually less pushed down. But then I wasn't able to get to those kind of high level positions because I had to. I'm kind of coming from the outside, and
Mhm.
so I don't know if I think a lot of women and other minorities have probably faced the same thing I've run into. But as a sociologist, what's your kind of view on those type of things?
Yeah, there is absolutely discrimination that is out there that does not allow people to rise to the highest level of their potential. And I think a lot of it is so deeply embedded in it's systemic, it's systemic racism, it's systemic gender issues. And it's so ingrained in our system that we don't even question it anymore. We don't question why there's still, a 70 cent to $1 disparity between incomes
Women.
when with women, we just think that's the way that it should be because people have earned their positions of power, earned their positions of wealth, and the people that don't have that position and power is because they're not as deserving. They didn't fight as hard. They didn't work as hard, which obviously is a myth because there's a lot of people who work really hard that, never reach their fullest potential because of these different forms of systemic racism and sexism that are built into our political, economic, and social systems.
Yeah, it's kind of run into like the country club crowd and like the guys who are in the same frat kind of crowd
Mhm.
when I run into in industry with like men. And because I don't look like a lot of those guys, and I don't go on the golf course, I'm not in their church, I'm not in their social group. They don't feel comfortable taking a guy like me from the outside and putting him in that group unless I make them comfortable. And I've tended to be the type of guy like, well, I'm not going to make them comfortable. I'm not going to follow, kind of, I'm not going to be like, I don't know, like the house slave versus the field slave. I'm not going to go do that.
Right. I hear
um,
you.
so like I'm not gonna make it easy, and so maybe I
Right.
kind of make it harder for myself because I'm not gonna do that. But I think like a lot of independent women probably run into the same thing. Do you want to be in that boys club? Do you go and like not get reacted by the things they say? Or do you try to like get along to go along, or do you actually challenge them and say, hey, I should be measured based on what I can do, not the way I look or who I am or my sex, you know?
Right. Yes, I've been fighting that battle for a very long time, and I do challenge it at every point, whether it's verbally, face to face with people, or the work that I do as far as what I teach and as far as what I write. I constantly try to challenge people's views of who should be in positions of power and why people are in certain positions of power and how they got there versus their myth of how they got there versus the reality of how people get to where they get. You've got to be in that club, right? You got to be at the right place at the right time, know the right people, have the right suit, tie, whatever it is. But yeah, it's not easy, and you do have to challenge people, I think, to get them to understand that we're all human beings and we all have our potential and we all have things that we can do that we're good at that, need to be tapped into, and that exploiting people um, for those gifts and not paying them or giving the promotions that they're deserving of, yeah, need to be challenged.
Yeah, it's just very interesting because I went to my brother went to Brown, he went to Harvard Law, I went to Bowdoin, my wife went to Mount Holyoke, and we've all hit this idea was we've had people come to us even without any kind of like asking them what their opinion was, and they were like, "Oh, I don't like affirmative action." They come up right to me out of nowhere and say that. So they basically are trying to negate anything that we did,
Hmm.
assuming that we got there and we don't deserve it.
Because it was a gift given by somebody, right?
Yeah, yeah. They can't assume. They can't ever think that you actually have the intelligence to do it,
Right,
and
that you earned it.
yeah, they just come out of nowhere. I mean, my first day at Bowdoin, some kid came up to me and said I was taking the qualified positions of other kids. He didn't even know me. He came into the cafeteria, came out of nowhere, and just started challenging me. And I'm like, really? I didn't even ask you to sit here. You just come up to me, and I was just and I think I see the same kind of behavior. That was like 1986,
Mm.
and then they see this stuff going on in Florida. I don't know what your opinion is, like all the kind of pulling like Rosa Parks books out of the library because that
Mhm.
offends somebody. But that's
Right,
history. How can a
right.
history offend you?
Exactly, but my suspicion is to silence history is going to allow them to repeat it. So they're setting the stage for being able to repeat history. And the more you know about history, the more, you know,
It repeats
difficult
itself.
it's going to be. It's going to be more difficult for people to challenge, what you're doing if they know history, if they have access to history. So they're just trying to erase it.
Yeah, it's just interesting to me that like they even came out about and this oh like, black frats and sororities can't exist because they offend certain people. like really? It's like and they went. They initially was like Black Lives Matter books they want to get rid of. Then they started going through, and any historical books that talk about anything that has to do with like slavery or civil rights or anything, is ban them. And it seemed very draconian. It seems kind of dystopian, and
Mhm.
it doesn't. And then the same type of person that's doing that is wearing a flag lapel, and they're doing something that back in the Reagan's time, he would have said that was like communistic, it's socialist behavior.
Mhm.
So it just seems like they don't even understand their own idea of the American concept. To them is totally not even what's in the Constitution. It's something else.
Right. Yeah, we even had a former president that, like, bragged about not even reading the never
Yeah,
ever even read the Constitution. No, why would I need to do that?
yeah. It just seems like the level of understanding, that's so interesting. Because I can trace my family coming into the U.S. back in the 1600s,
Mm.
and then you can have somebody come up to you and say, "Go back to Africa,"
Right, right,
and I'm like, "My family's been in the U.S. since the 1600s."
right.
So you might have come through Ellis Island. So who are you
Mhm.
talking about?
Right.
It's like there's like a totally not understanding that there's certain everybody, there are Chinese Americans, Black Americans, it's Latino Americans, but then there's an idea with the only real Americans are like all American,
Mhm.
and it's like so that right there is a bad place to start.
Right. And when I used to teach out in Southern California, I heard that all the time, from my students that were Mexican American or Hispanic. And, they used to tell me that people tell them go back to Mexico when their family has always been like, the lines were just redrawn, right? Like, that
Yeah,
used to be
yeah.
Mexico. That's where their
It's
family
all
had been
America.
for centuries and centuries. And I'm like, "What do you mean go back to Mexico?"
Yeah,
This
you
is
could say that parts of Texas were Mexico.
right,
So, like, it's like, so what are you talking about? Yeah, I'm still in America. I'm still in the Americas.
right.
I'm still a human being. And,
Ex
it's just gotten very nationalistic worldwide. And I actually had a professor when I was at school that said like the environmental crisis that's going to be coming, and this is 86, the resources, the lack of resources, the increase in viruses, the increase all these things that kind of foreshadow what we're living in, would bring about nationalism, would bring about kind of totalitarianism. And I actually see that all over the world. You see this kind of behavior, and it seems to be because people are getting stressed out because they can't have what they used to have, and then they
Mhm.
can't. So then they got to put the blame game on other people. But I'm just wondering what your opinion about that is.
Yeah, I think that's been a game that's been played for a long time. I mean, people our government and I think it's, like you said, it's global. There's global issues with this. But our government has always been one to play people against each other based on race and social class. And I mean, every politician that gets up and runs for political office, says we got to stop crime, and then they have, a representative of the black race
Yeah, it's a
as the
crime.
one that as the I
Willie
mean,
Horton.
up
Willie
until
Horton.
of course, President Barack Obama didn't do this, but I mean, up until that, that
Yeah,
was like the sample or the welfare mother. Who's the welfare mother?
yeah,
So they're always pitting us against each other saying, "Well, you're poor, but your tax dollars are going to help these people who are even poorer that won't do anything. They're lazy
yeah,
and they're
like yeah,
criminals."
yeah. The welfare
And
mother.
right,
The idea of like like I said, I think Willie Horton. You always have every time has its kind of boogeyman. So
right.
you create the boogeyman. You make everybody scared, and then it really like if you get into statistics, because I was in sociology majors, like people like they when you get into domestic violence, it's usually like your husband, your boyfriend, somebody close to
Mhm.
you. It's usually not some cross race. It usually doesn't happen that way. Usually the numbers are if somebody's gonna do the domestic violence, it's somebody who's very close to you, and it's usually not another race. That's like a rare occurrence. So the idea that the Willie Horton thing is just like a signal, kind of
Mhm.
like the kind of the criminalization of black people after slavery. If you were
Right.
just walking on the street. You didn't have enough money to put you right back in prison, put you right back on a cotton field, and they would just go and grab you like, oh, you don't have enough money, you're a vagrant, back in the prison, back in the field. The criminalization of the
Right.
free slave was like immediate. That was like the part, like right, like 1866. It's like boom, 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 right away.
Right. The convict leasing system, I think more people, African Americans, died under that than they did under slavery, just because of the dangerous jobs that they were forced into because they were criminalized, the mining and,
Yeah, yeah,
back on, yeah. And then because there were so many that were criminalized that the people who were leasing them out could replace them so quickly that they weren't protecting them in the way they were under slavery as far as, it was a commodity that was a useful commodity for them under slavery, where under convict leasing, it's like, okay, I can just get another convict
yeah,
leasee.
yeah. The slave
So
owner had insurance policies
right,
on slaves. I mean,
right.
I saw the Mass Mutual policies.
And,
you
and
know,
then,
they had like big insurance companies that actually have these contracts, and then
right.
you can go look at them and like, okay, if you don't want to deal with it, then deal with that.
Hmm.
That's a commodity. Somebody's got property insurance policy on a human being.
Right. And then
It's kind of
the whole recriminalization after the Jim Crow era with the war on drugs. I mean, all of a sudden,
yeah,
there's a
marijuana,
whole
you go right in the jail.
recriminalization issue, right? So
And yeah,
it's been a problem for, centuries in this country, the pitting people against each other based on race, and then of
and
course social class too.
and now you have like marijuana being made legal, and you have all these people that might be in prison because of marijuana. And there's like, so what about them? Like, if you make it legal now, does it retroactively get those people out because like now it's not criminal, but I guess it was criminal at the time, so it's point in time. If it's on point in time, you're still in.
Yeah, I'm not sure how what they're gonna do to deal with all that because I haven't really heard anything yet. Like, I've been trying to see what's gonna go on with that, but I haven't seen anything.
There's not a lot of movement on that,
Right,
and I
there's
guess they
not.
don't want they
Yeah,
want
I
to.
don't I don't think there is. I mean, I'm not 100% sure of that, but I haven't seen any. I've been trying to keep my eye on it, so.
Yeah, it seems like, that was because now people get to be, legitimate millionaires on marijuana, and so in CBDs and all these other things, and all these other people end up getting locked away.
Right.
But it's always the short end of the stick. But like the idea um that social justice and the meritocracy, maybe you can talk about like why, how you like prove it's a myth. Maybe you can talk about those points from your point of view.
Uh, well, I mean, if you look at who gets ahead in this country, it's usually based on what level you were. Like, that's why I call it a caste system.
Caste,
Like, if
yeah.
you're born into money,
Hmm.
it it's very hard for you to fail and go down, back down, right? You
Yeah,
stay up there whether, and I know, um, Bush Jr. got a lot of flack, but I mean, he was president of the United States, and his grades and everything. When you look at who he was,
his numbers weren't
I
where
mean,
somebody
his
else's might have to be.
right. I mean, he was no Barack Obama. Let's just say that as far as his
Yeah,
achievements and his grades and his level of intelligence, things like that. But he still made it to president. There's probably a lot smarter people that could be U.S. president, but I mean, he was born into that family. That
yeah,
was basically what he was mentored to be and was gonna be. It would be hard for him to mess that up,
yeah.
and
Yeah, it's like, it's kind of like when people think about the way things are in England, and we supposedly created this country to get away from that. And then we
mhm,
still have within the private industry, like, I mean, even the Kennedys, that came from like like an aristocratic kind of structure, right?
right,
And we have these like the Kennedys, and we have the Clintons, we have the Bushes. They got these families that are
right,
continually sending people into politics, and they
right.
feel like they're justified to be at that level. It's not really either, are they the best political people minds in the world?
Right.
maybe not. It doesn't seem like the idea of the economic capitalist system is the best and the brightest should get there. And then you have this kind of aristocratic kind of oligarchy type of structure of these rich people that can just get there, you know.
Right. And when they're born into that kind of money and prestige, they go to all the right schools that prep them for that. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of Jonathan Kozol's book, Savage Inequalities. It's a pretty, I think it was written back in the 90s, but he
Hmm.
talks about the inequities in the school system. I mean, we got kids going to schools with, you know, they have to go through metal detectors to get into class. They've got police guards watching over their classrooms.
It's
They
like a
have
mini
no
prison,
books and
like a mini
right.
prison.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the prison to, I mean, school to prison pipeline. I mean, it's preparing them for life in prison, not life in, as a CEO or, in
Yeah.
politics. And so we've got that glaring disparity too. And that's not to say that those kids aren't just as bright and couldn't be just as talented and couldn't be just as successful if they were given the same
Yeah,
resources.
well, if you take one of those kids, you send them into a private school, like a Catholic school. You
Mhm.
send them to a like, you send them to one of these like schools in New Hampshire. They end up going to Pemberton Academy or they go to St. Paul's. Then you see them perform, and so
Mhm.
it's just a matter of getting them out. And it's like my father. My father grew up in like Mason Square in Springfield, is like like a ghetto, and he made sure that when got into business, he became an insurance guy. He put us in a neighborhood that would put us into like the white school system. So we lived in a suburb, and we were like the one of two black families in this kind of Irish suburb, and we were able to go to that suburban school. And then because of that, I went to Bowdoin, my brother went to Brown, went to Harvard, and that was
Mhm.
because we were just the public school system within that city was like the suburban version of it would send you to Harvard, would send you to Bowdoin, and send you to all these really good schools. But the downtown, you wouldn't go anywhere but the factory,
Mhm.
or
Yeah, and if
military.
your if your dad hadn't done that, I mean, where would who knows where y'all would have been, right? You may not have ended up at
Yeah, it's just the way it is. I mean, I looked at
right.
that as like I thank my dad, but it was a struggle because I was outside of my community. Like we didn't have, girls that we could go out with. We had a lot of pressure with a lot of the kids, like having that kind of. They didn't like us because like
Mm,
we're like two black families in a neighborhood, like 100 families, and they're like, "Why are you here?" So like that's the stress. Like you put my dad, made a decision. They put us in there, but it was hard socially to operate, but we made it through. But it was like, I didn't have a lot of friends. I mean, I ended up having a bunch of oddball friends. I had a Polish kid friend and a Jewish kid friend because they were getting pushed down. And so like I started hanging out with the nerdy oddballs that we
mhm.
were able to kind of we found each other and said, yeah, we're the guys who are on the outside. Nobody likes us, so let's hang out. you know,
Yeah, that's how that usually works.
but that's like that's not everybody doesn't get that. A lot of the people in the structural system is designed to fail. It doesn't. Like you have a teacher, right? And if all their kids are not succeeding, it's kind of like the teacher is not a good teacher.
Right.
you know, but they measure the kid and say all the kids are not substandard. But if you take those kids out and you push them somewhere else, they might succeed. It's like the teacher is just not really motivating them, or the structure isn't motivating them.
Yeah, because those teachers in some of those communities, they don't get the resources they need either. I mean, there's a lot of those teachers in low income school districts that have to buy, their own
They have to buy
supplies
everything,
and
yeah. Well,
they
they
need
kinda
to
got the 8 ball,
yeah,
nobody's really helping them, and it's hard to,
no,
to kinda just not what you'd see at St. Paul's, not what you're gonna get at any of the Pemberton or Pinkerton Academy, like, you're not gonna get that. Um,
right.
so, like, the idea of, being able to, get out of I guess we actually see the light of the meritocracy, of understand there's a caste system. That must be really challenging when you teach that, or students that kind of like are very shocked by that. when you point it out.
Yeah, I think and they question it, but I teach at a historically black college and universities, Tennessee State University.
Mhm.
So I think I'm preaching to the choir,
Okay,
to
yeah, yeah, you probably
so
would
to
be.
speak, because I think a lot of them are like, yeah, we understand this, we know this, we've seen this, we've lived this, because we get a lot of students come out of Memphis and Detroit and
Yeah, yeah, they
west
would be
side of
preaching to the choir.
Nashville, right? So they I mean, I think some ways they're just excited that someone's talking about it. It's like, wow, yeah, we feel this. We didn't know how to put this in to
Yeah.
words. What do we do about it? And I tell them, I've already been through all the, fought the revolution, been through all the protests. Now it's up to you. If this bothers you, y'all need to get on the street and start,
Mhm.
gathering the troops and go vote and go, do all that stuff that you need to do to bring about change if it's something that is terrifying you. Because I mean, a lot of my students, they talk about police brutality and all that. They're like, we don't even know what to do when we get pulled over. If we behave, we get, we might get
Mhm.
shot. If we don't behave, we're going to get shot. And we just, what do
Yeah.
we do? So they're full of a lot of questions as far as achievements and struggles and police brutality and yeah.
Yeah, I've run into that as a black person, they're driving while black. And
Mhm.
living in the when I first got my first car, the cop comes up to me and asks me if I owned it. That's the first thing he asked. I wasn't even breaking any rules. I wasn't going over. He just asked if I owned it. Kept me there for a half hour checking it, and then let me go. And then I'm like, okay. And then that's happened multiple times. And a lot of what my father always taught me is like, just carry yourself in a respectful way. And and then there's my family, we've been pulled over, but a lot of times it's like you just not get overboard or do lurching movements. And you could do everything perfect and still have trouble, but there's certain things that can just escalate people. And a lot of times when you deal with like older black people that kind of knew how to deal with it, like my father, my grandfather, my uncles, they kind of gave me good, having men tell me what to do maybe helps. Like if you're in a house where nobody really told you what to do or gave you a good example, then you don't know what to do. And then that's
Mhm.
probably, then you go open the rabbit hole and you go down into the bad escalations that can happen.
Right.
So I think, yeah, I mean, the whole problem with the family structure, I mean, did that a lot of like the whole caste system, like if you pull like, the family structure out of like society, you get kind of like a chaotic issue, so is that part of what you study in terms of the caste system is like families that are able to stay as units and then families that can't, and then then they end up on assistance and end up in kind of like in being dependent on the government or not, you know, optimum.
Yeah, I do discuss that too, and then that leaves the children in those families very vulnerable to being victimized and being criminalized, and even maybe being involved in criminal activity. Not that they all do, but some of them, that might only be the only decision they can make to survive. So yeah, and we've got in Tennessee. I don't know if it's bad where you're at, but we have a horrible DCS system. Our Department of Children's Services is not good.
It's lacking, yeah.
Yeah, it's lacking. So we have a lot of children that are, placed in places they shouldn't be, and
Or bad foster home
that,
systems aren't really good, or
right.
the yeah.
Yeah,
So
we've got a lot of people. I hate to say this, but I guess I'm going to. There's a lot of foster parents that are doing it just to collect
money.
the money, and there's been a lot of DCS employees that complain because they can't really monitor that because we don't have enough DCS employees. Like
Oh,
their
wow.
caseloads are just enormous.
So it's
So
not a priority. So then
right,
people are just probably building like a child, mill type of system where they're just like
right.
pulling them in and making money off them, not really taking care of them. you know, abusing them, and that
Yeah.
doesn't help the society
No.
at all.
No.
If you don't value children, children are the future, but they can be they could be a certain type of future. Like
Mhm.
if you don't understand the whole macrocosm, right, of the things you do build up, right?
Mhm.
The thing that the people you don't pay to eventually you end up having to pay attention to them because they end up
Right.
being in the kind of chaotic factor in society. Like if you want people to be within a structure and then you don't give people structure, then they end up feeling this chaos theory, and it's just, they're
Right.
just going to go do what they need to do, and it's probably not going to be what you want at all.
Right, and that's the same thing I think about our education system. We're not investing in our children's education, and it's leading to, similar problems. I mean, we've got to start caring about feeding and educating and housing our children. We've got to show them that they matter, that they care, that they're loved. Otherwise, yeah, we're going to deal with them later and
Well,
not in a good
what
way.
I find is, like, at least in my business, the American educational system, right? Like, I'm in software design, and I got into it because I kind of forced my way in because I was a nerd, and I just went and did stuff the way I wanted, and I got into it. But the fact is, like, the American education system doesn't really train people to do what I do. Right? If you go to China, you go to India, you go to Japan, you go to all these other countries, even in Africa, in Nigeria, they teach better.
Mm,
So like our schools aren't teaching, for Apple or Google or all these big companies, they're not teaching what's necessary for you to be successful in those companies. So we're still seem to be based on something that's like 50, 60, 80 years old.
right. And that's why they're hiring a lot of people from these other countries and those big corporations you mentioned.
But it seems like we don't wouldn't there be a reason to actually invest in American public education to make us actually competitive? But I guess we just think that the private schools are where you're going to get those people from in the U.S. and then everywhere else you just pull them from other countries.
Mhm. Yeah. We don't want the poor people's children to compete with our wealthy children. I mean, I think it's somewhat intentional because if we leave them behind, then they're not gonna compete with the wealthy people's children.
Yeah, it was basically you keep it. Again, it used to be that maybe you could get a job at a factory and maybe you could feed your family, but now you got to work at Taco Bell, McDonald's, and Burger King all at once. And then like how are you going to be successful doing that? you
Mhm,
know so like you're just behind the eight ball because the society, like you said, it's got a cast. It's like
mhm,
it's readily apparent that unless you go out and really go to the library, go on the net, go get certified, do the things outside the structure, like think out the box and go like, I'm going to get my Microsoft certification. I'm going to get my Google certification. I'm just going to go do it. And I know kids that do it. I
mhm.
know, there are urban leaders that go and try to get the kids to do that, and then they get them in, and
Right.
you can save some people who are willing to at least be disciplined, and they go do it. And you can
Mhm.
discipline, teach people to have certain levels of discipline through churches and social groups. You can do that, but like if you don't get people who want to help outside of the government, then you will be caught in the cast.
Yeah, like you mentioned, those community leaders are so important in some of these areas, grabbing onto some of these children and showing them what they need to do to get out.
Yeah, because it just seems like the structure, from this, we're probably talking about minorities, but then when you get to like the whole women's issues, you run into you could be going, you could have go to Harvard, you could go to Brown, you could go to University of Michigan, you go to University of Chicago, you get into the corporate structure, and then you got that boys club,
Mhm,
and then what are they doing for they're keeping the women out, or they're keeping them at a glass ceiling, they're promoting them to a certain level, but they're not getting paid, like you said, what the guy got paid, and they got they both on paper might have the same capability, or the woman might be exceed the guy's capability, and they're not being paid at an equitable rate.
right, and then even professions where women start to dominate those professions, the professions are devalued. And I think about what I do right now as a college professor. When I first started going to grad school to get my PhD, I hardly had any female professors, my undergrad or grad school. And
Mhm.
now, there's a lot of female professors, but our profession has been devalued. The pay level, the
They
respect
dropped it.
level,
Yeah,
everything is so much different than it was when I went to college. And, an incoming professor, that's coming in an assistant professor rank can't raise a family on their income anymore. Used to be if you were a college professor, you could raise an entire, your wife or
yeah,
whoever could
everybody. Yeah, so
stay at
they're
home and pay for your kids. Right. Now, no, they the value of, what a college professor is, and I attach that directly to it becoming more female dominated.
yeah, and so it's that discrepancy on salary, and you see
Mhm.
that, like, like I get the, like, as a black guy in the IT office, I hit the same kind of thing at a level where, like, they're not willing to pay me. One time I found out, I don't know, in the bathroom, I heard somebody talking about their salary, and I found out I was getting paid like $30,000 less than somebody else. And then I challenged it, and I
Mhm.
actually went and got my money. And
Mhm.
then I left, and I got more money because I bounced to another place. But the fact is like, it was readily apparent that they do that across the board for different levels in the cast, whether you're a female, you're, from another race or ethnicity. If you're not in that boys club, those guys will get this. And they're driving in a Mercedes and they got in the golf course and they're this and that. And then you can't barely cover it paying your college bills because they were like, oh, well, yeah, well, maybe they don't merit that.
Mhm.
you know. And so yeah, so it's really hard to understand how to change that mindset because it seems like today it's even more stratified in the
Yeah.
last 5-10 years where people just have this ideology that if you're different you're not okay, you're not part of the, they keep on trying to find a, oh, you're not in the main cast. It seems like we're getting even more segmented.
We are, and I think that comes along with that "Make America Great Again." The underlying tone there is "Make America White Again,"
Yeah,
and let's
that's
let's
what I
get
saw.
America. And I think that is like really just a kickback from the 8 years of Barack Obama and the whites feeling threatened by a power structure shift. It's like, oh, now if a black man can be president, we got to rethink. We got to take America back because, that's not good. That happened. I mean, that's just my take on it, that
Yeah,
made
yeah,
the climate right for someone like
yeah.
Donald Trump because
Well,
they're
yeah, definitely. When Barack Obama came into office, a lot of people in my family, my brother, my cousins, all my mom, people in my family, we immediately felt a backlash
Mhm,
in our jobs in society where there were people they were upset that black family was in the White House, and then any black person they knew that they could affect, they negatively affected. And I felt it. And I'm like, wow, is this cool we got there, but we're getting hit pretty hard. and so, and it did, and then when the MAGA came out, it even got worse because I was like an Uber driver for a while, and I had to get out of it
mm,
because I would start getting these people that out of nowhere would just be violent and nasty for no good reason and felt empowered to be that way. And
yeah,
so it's like, it's so that is really jarring, if you could be a Chinese American walking on the street and somebody starts yelling China virus or starts attacking you, you're a black person and they don't like you. They go, oh, it just seems like it's like 1972 when I was going to a white school and people were anti-busing, but I was living in the neighborhood and they
mhm,
were just, very outlandishly crazy, really upfront racist. And it
yeah,
kind of got toned down, But now that kind of upfront don't have a problem just spouting out the N word. It seems to be like rampant. That people
Mhm.
don't seem to have any kind of social like control.
No, no filters, and I think that was modeled by our last administration, unfortunately.
Yeah, so it just seems like that the people need to be educated, but when you're getting rid of books, it's hard to get educated if you're going to get rid of like the diversity or even some other mindset. Like, if you're in government class, you learn about socialism, you learn about capitalism, you learn about all different social structures. Because you have to understand politics, you understand other political systems. But if you're going to say there's only one system, there's only one ideology, there's only one right way, it seems very Orwellian.
Yeah, and definitely not teaching our children how to critically think, like, it's important, like you said earlier, for us to think outside the box, but that's taking their ability away to really even understand what thinking outside the box is.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're going to have the same group of people who went to the same school, hang out on the same people, then they're probably going to make a decision and you'll make a bank fail because they don't see, oh, I don't need regulations because I'm smart enough that I don't need it. Right. And
Right.
so I can just, I'm, in this kind of elite thinking, so I can go and create this Silicon Valley bank and I make all the right decisions because I went to the right place. And then what do you do? You did the same kind of thing you did in 2008, you know,
Yeah.
because you're all in the same room. You're all the
Mhm.
same type of guy. You're nobody's thinking out the box. You don't like regulations. You don't like rules. Don't like FDR. So you didn't learn from the Great Depression. So he's
No.
like you didn't learn from 2008. So you do the same thing over and over.
Right. That's the problem with not understanding history is you're doomed to repeat it. Or the people will repeat it without you even knowing what they're doing. I mean, some of them are sharp enough to know what they're doing, but they're keeping everybody else in the dark, as far as taking away their right to understand those systems and to question what they're doing.
Was the idea like the robber baron? I was always very interested in the robber baron kind of. It seems like there's a lot of robber barons all over the planet right now. Like in
Mhm.
every country, it seems like that type of mentality, those type of capitalists or those type of industrialist type are mind share the resources from everybody, and
Yeah.
it's making it hard for regular people to be able to be successful because it's like people are at such a stratospheric levels above other people
Yeah,
that
it just
they
blows my mind that I used to think people that were millionaires had a lot of money. Now there's multi-billionaires
yeah.
just hoarding billions of dollars while other people are living out on the streets have nothing.
And then they're making social decisions about what's going to affect the middle class and the lower classes. They're making structural decisions
Mhm.
outside of our politics. They're able to get the ear of the politician and make structural decisions that are actually affecting all of us. And we have no way of even, being in the same room because their voice is, because of, Citizens United, like, oh, their voice is equal to a person. So now they can actually come in with their big billion-dollar, trillion-dollar collectives
Mhm.
and do things that are not in the interest of the common person.
Right. They're in their interest and politicians will respond to that because they're usually the ones who are supporting their political campaigns. I mean,
Yeah, because they need millions of dollars to even
to
run,
run these campaigns, right. I mean,
and then they get it from these big PACs and these big Citizens United conglomerates. They're multinational, and they decide, oh well, the VOC levels of the poison in your water, that's okay.
right.
Let a train go through a populated area with no bad brakes because you don't like regulations, burn the dioxin, that's all right.
Right.
It's like there's just so many decisions being made by these people, and they just don't have your interests. Like you like making the water dirty and the air dirty is not in the interest of the common person. but it might be in the interest of the person that runs the chemical plant.
Right, right, right.
But so, yeah, it just seems that the caste system, like you described, is not fully understood. The people, this well, that's an Indian thing. That's an outside the U.S. idea, and it
Right.
seems like we've maybe had that structure from the beginning. Would you argue that it was always there, or has it become more and more?
I think it's always been there, but I think it's becoming much more glaring and obvious now. I mean, I think the whole history of passing down material wealth from generation to generation has
Hmm.
made it much more of a part of our system. Like, just that's the way it is now, and no one questions it. It's like we just assume that that's just the way things work, and that person that's a senator now is more deserving because they worked harder, they studied harder, they fought harder to get there. But the reality is, they've come from this history of material wealth, and that's where they're going to end up because they're put in that position to fight for the rights of those who have money to make sure that they maintain their positions of wealth and power.
Yeah, because most of the politicians either coming from families that have that kind of historical wealth, or they're like the new money. They came from an industrial or corporate background and then become a politician to represent those interests.
Right.
So it's like that, which would be all you're not really getting like Joe Schmo or like somebody coming back from Vietnam or coming back from World War II and saying, I want to do something and getting to be a politician, where you might have had that more common in the past. And now, because of the amount of money that's needed, you tend to don't get that. You get people who are kind of already part of the system.
Right. You got your degree in political science, so I mean, you've probably seen it as well. How campaigns are run are more about who's financing it than they used to be. I mean, a person could actually kind of run for political office and didn't have to have millions of dollars to support their campaign. And now they do. I mean, because if you got to outspend your opponent, and it just costs a lot because of all the media stuff and the traveling to run your campaign. Back in the day, you got some newspaper articles, and you may have taken a train across the country, stopped in a few cities, but it's
Yeah.
nothing like it is
Yeah. The
now.
amount of money needed in the past, and the connection to like a real journalist, print reporter, or even a TV reporter. But now that you got to have all this opposition research, got to have your political action committee, got to have these high paid consultants
Hmm.
to do all this, like, political science. A lot of it is all the stats.
Right.
So you got all these, like, political scientists who are actually doing mathematical algorithms, and you got to pay those guys to do the algorithms to figure out how to win. And if you don't have substantial cash, you can't get those algorithms paid for.
Right.
you know, so
So
that's
the
kind of
normal concerned citizen on the street, if they wanted to even run, they probably couldn't because they wouldn't be able to compete against that kind of money.
yeah. Maybe you can get on the school committee. Maybe you can get on a local city council and then try to. But even then, once you do that, you're going to end up getting into that PAC money.
Right.
Yeah, you might have started very small, but eventually to get to the next level, you'll have to get co-opted in some level.
Yeah.
It's hard not to, unless they actually do real finance reform, which they try to do, and then they always throw it out.
Right.
But so in terms of justice for women, and maybe focus there about like the whole the plague of sexual assault and domestic violence, because a lot of people say that our society in multiple industries has like a rape culture, within Hollywood, within the music business, within, even like in the corporate businesses, there's like this culture where, it's sexual assault is like common practice.
Yeah. I mean, white male privilege, toxic masculinity, it's a real thing. I mean, men especially white males for years have thought that it's their right, like, to take women. If they want them, they should be ready, willing, and available. And if they're not, they're going to take them by force. Even and I'm coming back to Donald Trump again.
Yeah, lots of
I mean,
examples.
he got elected as president after he said, "You can grab them by
Yeah.
the,"
Well, he had a
and
lot of history. There's a lot of
oh, I
news
know.
reports of his, like, sexual assaults on multiple women
Right, and I
that
mean, but there's this whole culture of, that's okay. Men can do that to women, and it's funny, and it's cool, and, you know but
yeah.
no, it's not, no is
It
no, and right.
it seemed like within certain parties, like, like, if there's maybe some more accountability and some because, like, Gary Hart, he got not dropped out, and there's certain people they get dropped, kicked out, you know,
Right.
um, but, like, because it's maybe, like, the frat boy idea, the frat boy
Mhm.
kinda mentality, "Oh, well, that's okay," you know?
Right.
We got people on the Supreme Court that had that kind of frat boy thing going on, and, I saw it when I went to Bowdoin, and I saw it when I went visit my brother at Brown and Harvard, that kind of frat really bad behavior, that continues to the corporate level. These guys
Right.
continue that, and I saw it and I just was kind of disgusted by how I saw these guys acting. And I'm like, really? That's the way they think they should act. And then it's like it's not just something when they're 21, 22. They continued it into the corporate world. And I'm like, really? But it's like there's no accountability. It's like a lot of people just seem to let them go.
Yeah, there was a college professor at the university I went to that would tell the young girls if they'd sit in the front row without any panties on, they'd be guaranteed an A. And
Oh,
so many
jeez.
people complained to the dean and then complained to upper administration even from there. And because he was a tenured
And
full
he still
professor,
couldn't get out. He couldn't get him out.
couldn't do anything with him. Yeah, and he
That
continued. Yeah, there was all kinds of um, stories about him attacking them in their office, in his office when they go for assistance, tutoring or what, or to have questions or whatever. Yeah, and they kept him, and that's a lot of different places.
Well, it's
Not just
very toxic, in the kind of the world I've been in IT. People are like, "Oh, those guys are like Spock and stuff." Like, no, there's a lot of frat boy stuff going on.
hmm
It's not all Leonard Nimoy, all like logic. There's a lot of people that push people through because of that kind of frat boy bad behavior.
right,
And it's just it affects people from different ethnicities and religious groups, and it significantly deters or affects women because they're
right,
not able to get beyond certain points because these guys are like gatekeepers. Like there's this
right,
idea of the gatekeeper. Is that just a is that I've seen it in music and IT, and like it's across the board. Is the
hmm
idea of the gatekeeper.
right. And then just the whole, like, I if you don't look a certain way too as a female, I mean, if you don't have a certain look, like, there's a lot of discrimination against women who aren't attractive in the workplace, and because there's
Mhm.
these male gatekeepers, right? Um, so, yeah, there's abuse that way, and, yeah, just and domestic violence having the whole end of like, the whole dependency because of the economic disparities on men a lot of times leads to women staying in domestic violence situations or staying in jobs where they're continually being sexually assaulted or harassed by their superiors. Right.
But thing with the sexual domestic abuse, a lot of times like the police departments have not been very responsive. I've heard a lot of stories of like police departments would continually go to these people to a house and not really give the woman support. That
Mm,
they was the mindset of, and I don't know if that's been retrained over the years, that the police should have a better um, communication with women in that situation if they've been retrained to do it in a better way.
Um, at least in the area I'm at, a lot of women police officers have been roped into being the ones that go to a lot of these domestic violence situations, which are actually the most
Yeah, very
response
dangerous.
dangerous responses. But they send at least one female officer with a male officer a lot of times to domestic violence cases. to try to prevent that. But I don't know if that really is
It's
the
helping.
answer, if it really works. But I know one of the only solutions is to get an order of protection. But I mean, those usually don't. If a man's angry enough, they don't care if they have a order of protection against them.
Yeah, it really doesn't stop them from
No,
coming.
it's not going to stop them from coming at you. No.
Yeah, I mean, you actually need more protection than that, and usually there's not enough resources to actually give you protection unless you like physically move to another location that's hard for them to get to. Because like if
Right.
you're in the same area, yeah, I actually worked in a legal defense fund clinic when I was at Bowdoin and helping people get the domestic violence orders. And a lot of times, like, because of the psychological pressure in the home, we'd have women calling and actually to ask us to get rid of it
Right.
because of the psychology and the kind of the psychological violence being done.
Mhm.
So there's like the physical and then the psychological, and then it prevents them from getting out. They get into the codependency and the kind of like they're being feeling like they can't get out.
Right.
So then they don't always take the helping hand because it's like, oh, that's not really going to help me, so it doesn't really go anywhere. So it's just a mindset to try to get somebody to believe they're worth it. I think a lot of things like, we talk about spiritualism and the soul and the heart, as a musician, but like you have to kind of start to love yourself to be able to get out of something.
Right. And I think that's hard for women because they've been treated, or they've been trained, not treated, they've been trained basically to nurture, not
I
nurture
care about
themselves, but
themselves and
nurture, yeah,
other
nurture
people.
others. And so they're not really good at that, loving themselves. So that makes them vulnerable to being victimized by men, disrespecting them and treating them poorly because they think, in some ways, they think that's how they show their love. Like that means he loves me because he's jealous, or that
Yeah,
must mean,
yeah.
right, which is quite the opposite.
So how can women demand justice, in this kind of situation? What's like the best approach?
Um, I I think the best approach is to just start demanding our fair share and putting it out there. Like what I did with this book, I'm hoping that that'll get out to enough people that they'll read about the injustices and fight for the injustices. It looks like we're going backwards, right now in time as far as women's rights and concerns for women. I mean, they're trying to control our bodies again. They're trying, men are
Yeah, Roe
trying to,
v. Wade. Yeah,
but we need to get out there and just continue to fight for our equal rights, and we need to be protective of the women that are trying to get out of bad situations. We need to promote self-love to each other. And because I think we don't, as women, we don't give each other enough credit for who we are and what we do. And we need to start loving being respectful and loving each other, not acting. Women are always in competition. Like if I
with each other.
succeed,
Yeah,
yeah, if I succeed, another woman might be jealous. Well, no, there's no reason to be jealous. We all need to just bring each other up with each
yeah,
other,
like a sisterhood. Yeah,
Right, we
like
need to, like the
maybe too much
brother
brotherhood.
right,
Brothers
like
can
the
do the same thing.
brotherhood, right,
Yeah,
just
well,
like we've been right, what we've been talking about. You get that, that man brotherhood thing at the top that's causing glass ceilings. We need to do the same thing, and we've got a lot of women in positions of power now that, could use that power to bring about social change to make the world a better place for women, you
yeah,
know?
lift up. Yeah, you gotta like a lot of times. Sometimes it's been very difficult in minority communities because once they like, it's hard to get one person or two people in the door, and then what happens is the person that's in there, they become a gatekeeper.
Mhm.
So what we've seen, like with black, like I run into black men that get into a position and they become the gatekeeper and prevent other minorities from getting in.
Right.
They actually, reject resumes, reject
Mm.
people because they get threatened by the next guy that could come in. Well, he might take my position. It was so hard to get. I don't want him taking mine. So then I think maybe you have that kind of level of being threatened instead of trying to pull somebody up. You're like thinking they're going to take your role.
Right. The more we support each other, the better off we'll all be. I mean, we don't need to hold other people down. I mean, there's enough stuff doing that for us already that we need to just lift each other up.
Yeah, it's definitely it's like you should lift as many boats as you can when you get in there. It's hard, and I know some people just like they think about like the individual, and you have to kind of start thinking about groups. You got to start thinking about everybody, and we have a society part of the capitalist type of mindset is an individualism tends to make you not want to help other people.
Right,
You
we are
end
so individualistic, it's incredible, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe that's part of the mindset is becoming less individualistic. Not that,
Mhm,
yeah, you should try to be the best person you can be, but also, help the neighborhood, help the family, help the sisters, help the brothers, help every other person that you can. You
mhm.
know,
Right, I've traveled to a lot of different countries, and we're one of the fewer countries I see where we're so individualistic, like, a lot of other countries you go to, they're all in it together, that's not like this. I mean, the feeling's not like this. People are just
yeah,
always nice to each other, and there's not the ugliness that I feel here sometimes. I mean,
yeah.
I might.
I lived in Japan for 2 years, and they have like this mindset that was really interesting. But even with a guest, like if you're a foreigner, you're like a gaijin, which means you're an outsider. But I was treated like a human being in Japan with so much respect, and people told me, "Oh, you're going to be treated terribly." I was treated worse in the U.S. than I ever was treated in the 2 years I was in Japan. I was treated with like the most respect I've ever gotten in my life. And it was all based on what I could do. It was like a real meritocracy. They like if I did what I was supposed to do, they didn't have any problems with me at all. It was based on what I did. And,
Mm,
I really didn't see that in the US as much.
right,
But, yeah, so having the experience in other countries is like, wow, it was enlightening, because it's like it was a totally different world. And it would be cool to, actually see that. 'Cause we have a story that says, "Oh, that's the way we are," but I went somewhere else and I found out that they were more like it than we were.
right, right, right.
Well, I want to let everybody know, like, for the people who just hear this on audio, we have deborahburriskitchen.com on the bottom there as a link. And so if people click that, what can they find there?
They'll find a link to my book. They'll find a little background about me, my bio, some of the other stuff that I've worked on. Pretty much that's it. It's just my professional
That's so everybody
background.
can get they
Right,
can find your book. So if they want to get to your books, they can get to it from that link and
right,
be able to get introduced to everything you're doing and what
right.
you're about. So well, thank you again for being on a program. We actually reached our hour point. We always reach it faster than we would think. Um, but thank you for being on the show. This will be on a lot of other platforms like Spotify and iHeartRadio and Apple Podcast later today. So we will let you have that for your listeners so you can share that.
Okay.
And I do want to thank you for being on the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
And I want to thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.
All right. You too. Thank you. Bye.